where you decide to keep your emergency fund can either give you a huge benefit or it could turn your emergency even more dire. Let's talk about 3 different places that you can keep your emergency fund and which might be right for you. Hey, I'm Marissa. Welcome back to my channel where we talk about family finance and ways that you can budget, save, and make more money for your family. I know that you know an emergency fund is important. A good rule of thumb is to keep about 3 to 6 months of necessary expenses in your emergency fund. And we all have the thought that we don't want to touch it. Like we don't think we're going to touch it, but the day might come where you have to dip into your emergency fund. 2 years ago, my husband was unfortunately part of a mass layoff in the tech industry, and while we were fine during that time, it was really scary. And as soon as we found out that he was part of this mass layoff, it was hard to think straight. I knew that we had some emergency reserves, but even at the moment, it felt like maybe it's not enough. Thankfully, that season for us was very short. It was only like a month and a half, and we never actually had to pull from our emergency fund, but it's still so important to know where you should be keeping these funds. I've done all 3 of these things, and I'll give you the pros and cons to each, and we'll talk about which one might be best for you. The first place that you may keep your emergency fund is just in your regular bank. You have a checking account, you have a savings account, you keep your emergency fund in your savings. This is what we did for the first few years of our financial journey. After we paid off debt and we were working on building our emergency fund, we just kept that in our savings account. The pro here is that it's here in your same bank account and you have quick access to it. You can just transfer from your savings to your checking and then cover whatever expense you may need in a quick moment. But the downside here is that it's not doing anything for you. It's just sitting here in your savings account. It might earn you like 2 pennies in interest each month because the savings rates for just a regular savings account are very, very minimal. Now, I want to stress this by saying that an emergency fund is basically like insurance. You want to have it there so that you can use it if you need it. I know a lot of people may discount having an emergency fund because it's not earning you significant interest as it maybe could in the stock market, but that's not fully the point of an emergency fund. In this case, it is nice to have your emergency fund very close so that you can have very quick accessibility to that. But with the rate of inflation, you are technically losing money on your emergency reserves that you have set aside there because it's not earning you anything. The second place you may put your emergency fund is in a high yield savings account. And this is something that I learned about a few years into our financial journey, and I literally thought it was too good to be true. A high yield savings account is just like a normal savings account, except it can earn you over 10 times the average national rate. A lot of these banks are able to offer these high yield interest rates on a savings account because they are not a brick and mortar store, they're more online, so they don't have as much overhead, and they're able to pass along those savings to the customer. This is a savings account, and when you're looking for a high yield savings, you should find one that is FDIC insured. If it's truly a high yield savings account, it should be FDIC insured, which means that you're not going to lose money by putting your money into that high yield savings account. I personally use CIT Bank for my high yield savings account because they have some of the highest interest rates around. They have a platinum savings account, which requires you to have a $5,000 minimum, and that comes with a higher interest rate. And then they have a savings connect account, which only has a $100 minimum and a little bit lower of an interest rate, but still a really high interest rate in comparison to other savings accounts out there. And I will leave a link to CIT Bank in the description box below, and you can check them out there. It is an affiliate link, so I get a little kickback commission, so thank you if you use my link. Again, I personally use them. I recommend them to all my family and friends in real life. The pros here are that you earn significantly more interest on your savings. So your emergency fund is actually earning you something. It's not just sitting there earning you 2 pennies a month. It's actually like doing some work over here. Like, here's how much I earned last month in my high yield savings account. Like, I look at this in like tangible ways of like, this is covering my kids' swim lessons. The downside is that it typically takes about 2 business days to make a transfer from your high yield savings account to your regular bank through like an ACH payment. So this isn't as immediate as it would be with your regular bank account savings. But for most emergency situations, you don't need cash like right away, immediately within the hour, and you can take a little time to move that over. And we'll also talk about some ways that you can combine all of these options later on in this video. But a high yield savings account I would highly recommend signing up for because it's one of the easiest things you can do to better your finances. If your emergency fund is going to sit there, you might as well have it earn some extra interest by sitting in a high yield savings account. And the third place that some people use as their emergency fund is a Roth IRA. Now, this option has some risk. A Roth IRA is actually a retirement plan. Maybe you've heard of it before, but in 2024, you can contribute $7,000 into a Roth IRA, and I love the Roth IRA. My husband and I work to max out each of ours every single year because we know how important this vehicle can be for our future retirement. The Roth part means that you contribute to it after taxes, so when you have this money in your retirement account and you get to retirement and you take it out, you don't have to pay taxes on the money that you withdraw from that. It has tax-free growth. And here's the other benefit to the Roth IRA. At any time, you can withdraw your contributions to the Roth IRA, not the growth, but the contributions, tax and penalty free. So therefore, some people look at this and they think, oh, well, I can use that as an emergency fund. A lot of people assume that the market will grow on average like 7 to 8% conservatively a year annualized over the history of the S&P. So this is obviously a higher rate than you would get in a high-yield savings account. But when you put money into your Roth IRA, that growth is not guaranteed. And there's some years where you're going to be stagnant, some years where you may even lose money. And then there's other years where you may make 20%. 7 to 8% is not and guaranteed of what you're going to get each year. So let's think about if you had your emergency fund all in your Roth IRA. Yeah, it potentially could be earning you significant interest. But what happens if the economy is down, you lose your job, and you need your emergency fund out of your Roth IRA? You've probably heard the phrase buy low and sell high. You never want to take money out of your investments when it's at a low point. But if this is your emergency fund, you would have to do that. And that would be really terrible for your future retirement. Remember when I told you that my husband lost his job 2 years ago? We had an emergency fund, but also at that time, I had never ever had to pull from the emergency fund, and honestly started feeling a little bit more confident that maybe we didn't need as much in our liquid cash as what I thought. And so we had less in our liquid cash. Maybe we had like 10,000. And then I looked at our Roth IRAs thinking, yeah, we'll just use that as our backup emergency fund if the time ever came. And I can tell you that when my husband lost his job, I felt so uneasy knowing that we had less in cash reserves and we may have to pull from our Roth IRA. Like, I hated thinking that that may be a possibility when I was in the actual situation. Like I mentioned, thankfully we never had to pull any money from our emergency fund reserves at all, but I hated that feeling of knowing that that could be a potential. And after my husband got his next job, we upped our emergency fund, which we had available in liquid cash reserves. And I never ever wanted to think of our Roth IRA as part of our emergency fund ever again. But let's talk about ways that you may want to integrate all three of these for your emergency fund. I mentioned some pros and cons for each of these options, and I want to play to the pros of all of them. So here's what we do personally for our emergency fund. We keep 6 months of necessary expenses saved in our emergency fund, and you will find the vast majority of that in our high yield savings account because I want it to be earning as much interest as possible. And I also know that it'll just take me a couple days to move money from our emergency fund to my regular banking at a different institution if I ever needed those funds. But I also am sure to keep money in our regular savings account with my regular bank so that we have money super quick. I keep about 1 month of necessary expenses there, and then everything else is over in my high yield savings account. That way I have a benefit of having some cash available quickly, but do I think I'm going to need $30,000 all at once? Probably not, so I'm going to keep the vast majority of that in my high yield savings account earning some interest. Now, what about the Roth IRA? Like I mentioned, my husband and I each have a Roth IRA. I love the Roth IRA, and we want to use that for our future retirement. We don't want to touch it. But it is also nice to know that it is there if we ever were in a situation where our 6 month emergency fund just couldn't cover it. Now that would be a very, very dire situation, and it's like a backup emergency fund that I hope I would never have to touch, but it technically is there as an additional safety net should we ever be at the very low point that we would need that. So no, I do not consider my Roth IRA part of my emergency fund, but I do know that I have some assets available to pull from that account should we ever need it. So that is the breakdown for some options of where you can keep your emergency fund. Don't forget to check out CIT Bank and their high yield savings account. Some of the highest interest rates around. Earn yourself some interest on your emergency fund and any other short-term savings that you're working on. And subscribe to my channel for more family finance videos, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.